The Cougar QBX is my first small form-factor case. When I initially built in this case more than 2 years ago, I was inexperienced and ignorant, so I had my fans installed in the wrong direction, and there were many comments pointing the issue out. After learning from the mistakes, I decided to give the case and myself another chance. That's why I named the build The Redemption. So let's talk about my building experience with the case this time and see what temperature and noise of the build are. For the building experience, I would say there's no reason to go with the Cougar QBX in 2021, especially when we have the cooler Master NR200. The case design is very dated, and due to the small cutting holes for routing cables, it is very difficult to build in, even though it is the biggest SFX case. Unless you want to challenge yourself, buy a newer case. When I first built in this case, I had to cut out this metal frame to install the GTX 1070 and the GTX 1080 Ti because their SLI bridges were blocked. For the Asus TUF 3090, cutting the frame was unnecessary because I saw someone on Reddit installing the card just fine. However, for aesthetic, I decided to trim the rest of the frame. Also, before building, I tested if I could install the card, and this part blocked the GPU. As you already saw in my previous video, I had to trim it down and used a permanent marker to paint the cut. Looks good anyway. I also wanted to add the two slim 120mm nocturnal fans at the bottom to give the GPU some fresh air, but I could not install the TUF RTX 3090 with those two fans. This is very strange because I could do it with my Strix GTX 1080 Ti, which has the same thickness as this 3090. So I could only rely on the 80mm intake fan to cool the GPU. But by replacing the feet of the case, the card has no trouble getting cool air from the bottom. Installing these feet is very simple. You only need to use M3 screws and nuts to mount them. If your screws are too long, use washers to accommodate the extra length. The 24-pin and PCIe power cables of the Corsair SF750 power supply were made by DreambigbyRay on Etsy. I created myself the ESP cable and 3 SATA cables for my two 2.5-inch drives and the Corsair iQ Commander Pro. I really like how they turned out, but they are the reason that this build took quite a while to finish. I also replaced some black plugs of the cables with white plugs, just to make them look cooler with the pink and white sleeves. I used to use zip ties to mount the Commander Pro, but this time I used super glue to stick 2 strong magnets on it. As long as the case is made of steel, I can mount the Commander Pro wherever I want. Because I placed this behind the PSU area, the power supply had to face inside the case, and many people said hot air would be bad for the PSU. I think that is exaggerated, because not only the SF750 can cool itself with its 92mm fan, I also have a 120mm fan on top that actively pulls hot air out of the case and out of the PSU. Another issue is the heatsink of the M.2 SSD on the back of the motherboard. The heatsink and the thermal pad I used were too thick, so the SSD was spent significantly. So I had to switch to a slimmer heatsink and 0.5mm thermal pad. It seems to fit perfectly, and my drive does not have any temperature problem. I added 2 2.5-inch drives to the case. The slot in the back allows slim mechanical drives or SSDs to be installed. However, installing thicker hard drives is not possible at this slot. That's why I mounted my 1TB 7200 RPM hard drive next to the power supply by using the case's CD mount, and the thickness of the drive is no longer a problem. If you need more storage or want to install a 3.5-inch drive, you need to use the side bracket, and in my opinion, it is so ugly. And lastly, I can plug the PCIe power cable directly to the GPU without using the 180-degree adapter. The case panel can be closed with no issue. And yeah, the PCIe cables are a bit long because they were made to be used in another case. Next is the temperature of the CPU and GPU. All the fans installed in this case are software controlled, which is very convenient. The Corsair Commander Pro is used to control the two 120mm exhaust fans by using the CPU temperature, while the GPU temp is used to control the 80mm intake fan. The three fans of the CPU cooler as well as the fans of the graphic card are controlled by the fan control software. I already had a video about this software which allows us to grade fan curve for any temperature sensor, so feel free to check it out. Next is the temperature and noise of the system. Overall, I was surprised to see the temperature of the RTX 3090. The card runs much cooler than when it was installed on my test bench. I think the 80mm fan actually does its job very well because I rarely saw the three fans of the GPU spinning. However, it is a different story with the triple fan NHD9L CPU cooler. The CPU is much hotter than it was in an open-air system, even though we have two top exhaust fans. Anyway, I removed the RTX 3090 because it belonged to my 9900K PC and the RTX 2070 Mini is put here. By using the slimmer card, I can add two slim intake fans at the bottom with some dust filters to keep things clean. On the Commander Pro, I plugged the 80mm fan in slot 1, slot 3 and 4 are used for the bottom slim intake fans, slot 5 and 6 are for the two top fans. With the amount of Noctua fans jammed in the case, I think I should have named this an OnlyFans build. I also used this USB 2 cable to plug in the Commander Pro in order to power the RGB wireless controller. So, for people who dislike RGB, you may not like what you see next. In conclusion, this is still not a fun case to build, but if you have custom cables for your power supply, your building experience would be much better. I hope my videos about the Cougar QBX are useful to everyone who is planning to build in this, because this is still a very good value entry-level SFF case. And that will be the end of today's video. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.